So welcome to our last talk for the day. Please welcome the well-known anthropologist Margaret Mead to our 1975 Parapsychological Association conference. She's the new president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS. And in 1969, she was instrumental to the PA becoming a member of the AAAS, and will now tell you how it happened. Welcome, Margaret Mead.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And as you can see from my being elected president of the AAAS, being involved with parapsychology does not have to derail a career in science. But nevertheless, it was a very long, hard trail for the Parapsychological Association to become a member of the AAAS. As you know, it became an established scientific organization in 1957. But it wasn't until 1963 that Carol Nash, who was then the president of the PA, decided to apply to the AAAS and was rejected. And then Douglas Dean picked up the torch, and in 1967, 68, and 69, applied to become a member of the AAAS. Each time it cost $150 a fee to apply, and 4.5 pounds of documentation that were sent to each of 12 committee members who had to accept the organization. Now, the AMA admitted hypnosis into its ranks as a field of study in 1957. So why couldn't parapsychology be part of the AAAS? The vote at the 1969 meeting was dramatic. I was there myself and saw Douglas Dean there as well, and he wrote a later report of the material that ensued, which I read, and I'm going to read from his report pretty much as he wrote it. It's as accurate as I remember it also. First, the AAAS president, Dr. Bentley Glass, brought up affiliation applications of the American Orthopsychiatric Association and the Parapsychological Association. Dr. Glass said, "I will put each organization separately to a vote. The Orthopsychiatric Association, do I hear a motion? Yes. Second, yes. Any discussion? Silence. All those in favor, say aye." Aye it was. So the motion was passed. For the Parapsychological Association, do I hear a motion? Silence. Then a soft voice said, yes. Is there a second? Silence. But after 5 seconds, someone said yes. Any discussion? Well, then there wasn't silence. Several members tried to get to the microphones. One said that the so-called phenomena of parapsychology doesn't advance science. But someone else pointed out that scientific advance is full of investigating phenomena in which the establishment did not believe. Another said, we are not familiar with what parapsychology is, and so we can't be qualified to make a vote on this association. But Dr. McConnell of the PA had mailed parapsychological literature to all 530 AAAS delegates. Dr. Glass added, the Committee on Council Affairs considered the PA's work for a very long time. The committee concluded that it is an association investigating controversial or non-existent phenomena. However, it is open in membership to critics and agnostics, and they were satisfied that it uses scientific methods of inquiry, thus that its investigation can be regarded as scientific. Is there any further discussion? And that's when I spoke. I said, for the last 10 years, we have been arguing about what constitutes science and scientific method and what societies use it. We even changed the bylaws about it. The PA uses statistics, blinds, placebos, double blinds, and other standard scientific devices. The whole history of scientific advance is full of scientists investigating phenomena that the establishment did not believe were there. I submit that we vote in favor of this association's work. Dr. Glass, the question of a vote is raised. Because of the controversial nature of this motion, we need a show of hands. Council members in favor of this motion, it was approximately 160 to 180 hands. Those against, it was approximately 30 to 35 hands. Dr. Glass, it seems that the motion is carried. And that's how the PA became a member of the AAAS. Douglas Dean was overcome with emotion. Now, many parapsychologists would not have to worry about tenure or promotion, and there might even be more money coming in. But then something very surprising happened. There were members of the Parapsychological Association who were very unhappy about becoming a member of the AAAS. This was absolutely dumbfounding. After all of that struggle to be objecting to the membership, I asked a very charming young parapsychologist, Robert Morris, what his opinion was of this. And he said, you know, there are parapsychologists who prefer to be part of what you might call a marginal organization, one that is not part of mainstream science. They're afraid that if we became part of the entire community of science, we would be subsumed and we wouldn't feel as special anymore. Well, the naysayers were not successful. And currently, now that it's 1975, PA symposia are presented at the AAAS, and there are delegates from the PA at AAAS meetings. Now you might be asking, what were my motives for supporting the Parapsychological Association? I have never run away from controversy. Those of you who know my books will know I discussed female sexuality in Samoa and sex and temperament, sex roles in 3 societies in New Guinea. My critics feel that I was biased to some degree, but I say that my critics were at least equally biased in their analysis of the material. I also presented what were then controversial ideas on child rearing, and Dr. Spock incorporated some of them in his best-selling books that were guidebooks for parents. In addition, I fought with people who said that IQ and race were linked in terms of those races that were inferior, whether indigenous peoples or various ethnicities in European and American areas, that lower IQs were linked to somebody's racial identity. I would say this is a totally unscientific view, because if the IQ tests were composed with the type of material that people are most familiar with, then they would score the highest on that type of IQ test. And the people who have composed the so-called standard IQ test on the other IQ tests composed by indigenous and various ethnicities, those people claiming that these people are inferior would actually be the ones to come out looking like morons. So that was another controversial area that I got into. And I think that there are other reasons that, that I supported parapsychology as well. I think that there are many things that the 2 fields have in common. For one thing, they both look at case studies and do field work. And both are interested in finding some type of feature that will explain certain things. Now, they might be interested in finding different types of things. I think that what parapsychologists are looking for are some replicable truths, and I think anthropologists are looking for this socio-psychological context in which their findings occur. But each field would be well off to look at what the other field actually examines. For instance, as far back as 1945, a parapsychologist named Gertrude Schmeidler looked at what she called the sheep-goat effect, that belief in something could affect how the results came out. So that people who believed in paranormal phenomena would do better on ESP tests than those who didn't. Some people even believe that what a parapsychologist who does research believes could affect the results. So looking at people's beliefs, which is something that anthropologists do all the time, is not unknown in parapsychology. At the same time, there is quantification done in certain areas of anthropology. For instance, ethnolinguistics, looking at, for instance, farming practices and what the results are in various societies, and the like. So the fields are not as far apart as perhaps some people would think. Now, throughout human history, people have paid attention to the things that both anthropology and parapsychology look at, perhaps with a different lens sometimes. But you go back as far as the Greeks and Romans, and you hear about divination, looking at omens, ghosts, communication with non-human entities, and various societies have talked about non-medical or herbal forms of healing. We also find mention of these things in the Bible. And in Western society, we do have people trying to divine through astrology, tarot cards, reading auras, but they are not considered part of mainstream society. There are subcultures in the West, the Scottish Highlanders believing in second sight, people in Appalachia who descend from immigrants from this area also believing in the second sight, various in America, immigrants who came from the Caribbean might have retained some beliefs that came from Africa in this type of phenomena, but it has not been part of what the West considers its main way of looking at things, except when it's actually doing things that are, in fact, having some kind of paranormal context, just not looking at it as that. For instance, what is dowsing? Well, there's a person who's holding the wand. It's not necessarily the wand that's finding things, especially when it's map dowsing. So you can say that these traits are human traits. I personally don't think that there are groups that have it more than other groups. They might just talk about it more. I think it's like a musical talent where you might have a Mozart born every now and then, and you might have people who are tone deaf born every now and then, but most people can learn to enjoy music and play some type of musical instrument. It just might not be at concert level. And I think that psychic abilities are similar to that. Now, in indigenous cultures, we have people using ritual and going into altered states as that might be psi-conducive. And they might be, in fact, doing blessings, curses, and healings, and psychokinesis could be part of that. Anthropologists have often downplayed these things. For instance, if somebody got better after a healing, they would say that it was due to some type of placebo effect. But you could ask whether a placebo effect isn't perhaps some form of psychokinesis. And there's a great deal of variation in indigenous cultures as to whether these abilities are good or bad, or both good and bad, or it depends on who uses them and under what conditions. Um, and we could say perhaps that people's beliefs in Western culture would be the same were it not for some people thinking that it's the voice of Satan. Now, in Aborigine culture, you could be visiting with somebody and they will say, oh, my uncle is going to come in 3 days. And the uncle does, in fact, come 3 days later, and they have no phone. So how did they know? Unless it was a feast day and the uncle would be expected anyway. But these types of things happen too frequently for there to be an explanation of that sort. So I would say that that we could examine this happening in indigenous cultures, but we could also look at our own culture, because these days anthropologists don't say that you have to go somewhere else to look at how people function in certain ways. You can look much closer to home. And now in the 1970s, there was a counterculture where many members of this counterculture are altering their state of consciousness one way or another through meditation or the types of mood altering drugs, consciousness altering drugs that Timothy Leary has been talking about. And then we also have researchers, such as at the Maimonides Dream Lab in Brooklyn, New York, where a federally funded program to examine how people's dreams could incorporate elements of clairvoyance and telepathy and precognition, all three, was a successful experiment. And I believe that there are other types of altered states work going to be done there in the future. Now, as I tell my students, you know, dreams are free and legal, and there are ways to remember your dreams. And so I encourage them to, if they want to be more tuned into their psychic abilities, to pay attention to their dreams, or to follow other means that are free and legal to alter their state of consciousness. In anthropology, we don't only examine this phenomena as it appears around us, but also sometimes clairvoyance has been used in archaeology to either find certain types of sites or objects, or to figure out what their use might have been. Now, as my last of my 3 husbands, and my dearest, I should say, Gregory Bateson said, "We are trained to think in patterns, and all experience is subjective, and that science is also, in a sense, subjective because it's based on presuppositions." This year, 1975, we had a Parapsychology Symposium at the AAAS, and we've had others. I'd suggest, though, that in the future, parapsychologists should watch out for that physicist, John Wheeler, who has been accusing J.B. Rhine of fraud lately. Well, I would really like to answer any questions that you might have. So if there are any, I hope that, that you'll be free to ask them. Since I'm willing to deal with controversial subjects, you can ask anything you want.
Well, thank you, Miss Mead. I want to say if anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat, and I'd be happy to relay them to you, to Margaret as we go ahead. You know, I had a question that was coming up in my mind. You know, being that it's 1975 and we've been part of the Parapsychological Association since '69, there has been some new research that's been coming out by some brilliant researchers in the field. Research related to out-of-body experiences, research related to altered states of consciousness that started to be published in the '60s and has really grown in the '70s as well. How do you see that relating to the AAAS and relating to the work that's being done in terms of science?
Well, I think that a very good first step was that the PA was accepted into the AAAS. But also there are other fields of science that are looking at these issues. And certainly if the methodology of science is being used, then there is no reason to exclude these things from our examination. I believe that there's an experiment using a witch's cradle that Charles Honorton at the Maimonides laboratory has been doing. And also he's been talking about doing sensory isolation or deprivation experiments. So I think all of these have implications. You know, it does lead to a rather tangled question of that if we really alter our way of looking at things, should we also be altering the way we do science? Because science is in itself a collection of rituals, at least looked at, if I looked at scientists as a subculture, then I would see them having their own rituals, their own language, and point of view, you know, starting with a certain point of view. And I don't know if scientists really do that. That's type of self-examination that much. But I think all of it is worthwhile and a very good direction for us to be going in.
So, do you see a future for parapsychology, either within the AAAS or just within the field itself? And do you have a vision of how we might be able to grow into a bigger science?
Well, I think Bob Morris was actually onto something, that if parapsychology proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that certain phenomena existed and were replicable, perhaps other science areas would start incorporating parapsychology into their research. And parapsychology might not exist as a separate entity. Its success may actually be what would disband it. Whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing, I will leave it to the Parapsychological Association to determine.
So, of course, your contributions to the field of anthropology are legendary. And there are people within the field of parapsychology who are talking about para anthropology. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
I would see it as a very great advantage to be trained in both areas. If somebody is doing field work in anthropology and encounters a shaman doing various things, yes, they can record exactly what is happening, but I think knowing something about how it might be explained more than one way would definitely be to the anthropologist's advantage. And at the same time, I think parapsychologists would benefit by focusing on some of the cultural issues and the context in which things occur, the same way that anthropologists do. You know, the structuralist concept of anthropology is that everything that we can see in a culture fits together with every other thing, that you can't take one away without having it be affecting the whole, you might say. So I think that it would be useful for parapsychologists to look at the entire context of what they're doing. And I know that there are some people who don't think that the case studies that, for instance, Louisa Rhine collected are of as much benefit as the quantitative research that J.B. Rhine did, but I think that they both provide a vision of what is possible to discover.
So, you've mentioned Bob Morris a number of times, but are there other parapsychologists that you could see really helping to push the field forward? and make it and provide a strong scientific foundation?
Well, I did visit the Maimonides Dream Lab and felt that the people who worked there, which included Montague Ullman, Stanley Krippner, and Charles Honorton, were doing their best to find things in a scientific way, each one in a slightly different way, actually. Montague Ullman was focused on dreams. Stanley Krippner did an amazing amount of travel and field work, in fact, interviewing many shamans. And Charles Honorton was in the laboratory figuring out other means of doing altered states related parapsychology research. So that's definitely one group of people. I'm in the New York area, so that was a group that I was most familiar with. I know that there's a group of people in Durham, North Carolina, where the Foundation for Research on the Nature of Man, which is what J.B. Rhine founded after retiring from Duke, it attracts many young researchers, and there are many people from that group who have done work and published work. You know, I have heard about government projects that are so top secret we don't know exactly what they are, but that the U.S. government has become interested in certain types of parapsychology research. And there are some people at the laboratories who are now concerned that they're being spied on, or that there might be government interference with what they do. I know that Charles Honorton said he didn't care if the CIA funded him as long as they let him publish whatever he discovered. So that's one possible solution to that type of dilemma. You know, people have criticized my beloved ex-husband, Gregory Bateson, for leading a double life. He was involved with the CIA as well as doing anthropology, and some people have criticized the fact that he was using anthropological data and looking at it as a way that people could be controlled for the benefit of either the British or the American government. On the other hand, he was very much involved with altered states. He was at California's Esalen, and you know, and he also came up with theories about schizophrenia and parents who put their children in a double bind, making them schizophrenic. I think sometimes he was a little schizophrenic, and that's why our marriage did not work. But I am off on a tangent. I'm sorry. I didn't totally answer your question.
I just loved listening to you talk, and I think you did a great job in answering whatever I was asking at that time. So there's some questions have come in related to culture and how the culture of our society influences parapsychology and how parapsychology influences the culture. It seems that as since the 1970s, so early 1970s, that we've had more of a spiritual revolution in this country. Do you see that having an influence on parapsychology, or vice versa? Do you see parapsychology maybe helping this to develop?
Well, if you look at language, I think that J.B. Rhine influenced the culture because there are words that we now have that we never had before. So certainly the culture has been influenced by parapsychology. People now have the language to talk about these experiences, when before maybe they could describe them, but they wouldn't say, yes, this seems to have been an ESP experience. So yes, I think we could say that parapsychology has influenced the culture. Now, as to the culture influencing parapsychology, I would say that we're all grounded in whatever culture we're most involved with, even anthropologists. So that it would be hard to say that the type of research we were doing or the way we perceive its results was totally devoid of our own cultural biases. I think that it's to some degree impossible to completely eliminate them. But I think the culture is changing. That I think that there have always been spiritual directions in American culture. Look at all the religiously oriented communes of the 19th century, for instance. Um, but perhaps um, it's going in a different direction. Those communes always needed to survive a strong leader, for instance. And I think the spiritual direction that America seems to be going in now is not necessarily one of follow the leader. It's for individuals to follow what they find in themselves internally. And that might be something different from what we've had before.
That's really interesting, and it kind of leads to another question that's come up related to researchers in the field of parapsychology tend to be looking at certain aspects of human experience and exploring the experience that people are going through, and that meets some resistance with some of the mainstream scientists. I was wondering if, from an anthropological perspective, if you think that that's a good direction to continue to pursue.
Well, from an anthropological perspective, there is no experience that's not worth examining, um, especially in the context of wherever it is happening, because anthropologists like looking at the cultural context as well. So I would say that if people are having um, personal experiences that they feel are paranormal, which is what I imagine you were referring to, then there's a great deal to be learned from that, because we don't know what to look for unless we hear about it from somewhere. And I know that Louisa Rhine collected thousands of cases of people writing to her, and certainly was able to develop certain theories about it, such as it was often because it was right after when they put in that ad, or they wrote articles in the Reader's Digest, the Rhines did, and asked for people to send in their personal experiences. But it was right after World War II and the Korean War, and so there were a lot of dramatic mothers feeling that something happened to her child at a distance, and then they get notification that it happened at exactly that moment. So that allowed the idea that some type of strong emotion might be a carrier of psychic information, or the fact that many people reported things coming through to them in dreams that may very well have influenced, although I didn't ask them this, the Maimonides researchers to start doing dream studies. Certainly there are legends and stories of dreams that go throughout history. If you go to the Bible, you have Joseph having his dream of 7 fat years and 7 lean years as a prediction of that a famine was going to come 7 years later. And according to the report, it came true. So we have the idea that things can come in dreams for many millennia. And so people talking about their experiences is of value, I believe.
Well, this has been a very interesting discussion, and you've been so generous with your time tonight. I really appreciate you being here with us. I want to give you one more opportunity if there's anything you'd like to share with us that we haven't gotten to before we go.
Well, not from me. I just want to state my pleasure about being able to talk to the Parapsychological Association and to make you feel welcome in the AAAS, because I know there are some people who still are edgy about that. But I understand that you have somebody else coming right now. So I will leave right now and say farewell for the time being, and you can prepare the listeners here for your next speaker.
Well, thank you very much. And I do want to say this is a very unique experience and something we don't usually see. And now we have Dr. Sallyanne Drucker, who's currently a PA member, a Rhine Research Center board member, an the interim editor of the Journal of Parapsychology, and she's presented notable and notorious women at Chautauquas in 11 states. This is her first as Margaret Mead. She'll now answer any questions that you might have for her. Sally, you around here?
The most difficult thing of doing these types of presentations is taking off the wig. And in the training that I received for Chautauquas, I was told that you always take something off, you unmask before you become yourself. You know, in these types of humanities programs, there's supposed to be a follow-up. And there were a couple of things that Margaret couldn't answer because she died in 1978. So I'll just tell you what they were, and then you might have questions for me. And one of them was that this physicist, John Wheeler, refused to share the podium with parapsychologists at a symposium on consciousness organized by Robert Van de Castle in 1979. He accused J.B. Rhine of fraud, but his witness later recanted. So I have Margaret kind of foreshadowing it because I couldn't have her talk about 1979 when she died unless I was going to channel her even more than I did. So, that was one thing. And another was that in 1981, parapsychologist James McLennan, who's I believe a PA member or has been around, surveyed AAAS members and found that 69% thought that ESP was worthy of study, whether they believed in it or not. And then in 2012, Douglas Dean's manuscript was donated to the PA by Robert Van de Castle at a PA convention that was in Durham, North Carolina. And information about this and other things related to the AAAS accepting the PA appear in a 2016 PA Mindfield publication. And Annalisa Ventola, who's here somewhere, I think I saw her name, is to be commended for making all of this accessible to us all. And so I owe a debt to her and to Lloyd Auerbach's course on paranthropology for some of the information that I was able to incorporate into this presentation, as well as various sources on Margaret Mead. And to my understanding, the AAAS currently has representatives from the PA attending, but has not continued having regular parapsychology symposia. So perhaps that's an avenue for the PA to explore. So now, I'll answer any questions that you might have for me that I can answer that Margaret couldn't, or whatever. My own interest comes because I had an undergraduate minor in anthropology, and maybe I even would have gotten a PhD in it, except that there wasn't any emphasis on urban anthropology in those days or looking at subcultures in your own society. It was all going off into the wilds, and I was kind of scared to do that by myself. So instead, in my college years, I went off into the wilds of parapsychology, which didn't involve being in a tent with bugs. So that's my history in relation to it. But if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Annalisa, you go to a lot of these PA meetings, or I'm sorry, the AAAS meetings. Did you have anything that you might want to add, or anything that you might want to include here?
Hi.
I'm sort of surprised to have camera rights, but this is cool. Sally, that was so fantastic. You just had me grinning ear to ear the whole time. And it was fantastic to hear. I think sometimes parts of my paper sort of come alive, and that the history of that period of the PA and the AAAS is just so fascinating, and I don't think enough people know about it. So I'm just so grateful for the last hour. It was fantastic.
Would you know if there are still symposia that the PA offers at the AAAS?
No, I have been the representative to the AAAS conference, so I've gone for almost every year for the last few years. I did try to organize a symposia about 4 or 5 years ago. It was rejected. It's not anything I take personally though, because they have like a 66% rejection rate or something like that. for symposia. And I think, the thing to do is to just try again. But, it takes a lot of energy to do that as well. So, but I think it's a really good suggestion. I think we should just let them say no. If we were to get rejected 6 years in a row, then I'd wonder if something was up. But
And it could always be a PA presentation if it doesn't make it to the AAAS.
that's true. I think you know what I like to do though. I think it's important. They have yearly themes, and so I think it's important to try to meet their theme and meet them where they are, and so that requires thinking in a specific way, and it's maybe not always going to translate well to a PA convention. But that is a really good suggestion. I might think about that next time.
Yeah, it's something for all of us to think about.
Yeah, but yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this, Annalisa. I appreciate it. And and I have heard that besides the national AAAS convention, they do have some smaller local ones. And I do know I've spoken to some parapsychologists who have gone to some of the smaller ones and been able to do presentations, particularly some remote viewers who have been able to do this and have had really good receptions at some of the smaller conferences that they've done. Sally, thank you so much.